Hardcore.
They're petrified of some kind of backlash.
I wanted my money back. It was very disappointing.
Nobody wants a movie about true love? What kind of woman do we want out there seeking true love, Eliana? It's the outrage.
Every way that Disney changed the story, it changed it for the worse.
They are pretending like Rachel Zegler is the first of them all when she looks like Lord Farquaad in the film.
The new Disney boss babe, who is Rachel Zegler, the inverse of happy.
So she comes off as an insufferable, whiny brat.
No one on the right side of America can stand the star of this movie.
Rachel Zegler, like so many kids raised on TikTok, she's all for infantada is the only global solution.
Now, I'm guessing that she's not married. I'm guessing that she doesn't have kids. The movie is a complete disaster, by the way.
Have they ever thought about maybe like a little bit of like, I don't know, vulnerability study, opposition research, that sort of thing, before you go and hire some Zoomer who's a lunatic?
So apparently, according to them and according to the writers of Snow White, women can't even want to be in love anymore.
Rachel Zegler is extraordinarily woke, but she's woke in a way that's quite deranged.
They spent $170 million to make the thing, and it had the lowest opening, under $50 million, of any of these live-action Disney remakes that they've ever had.
And, you know the saying, go woke, get broke, and Disney's going to lose money on this movie. And I believe it only made less than $1 million in China.
She was Disney's fairest of them all, until the studio's decisions turned their classic remake into their darkest nightmare. In just one weekend, Snow White shattered box office predictions. Not by exceeding them, but by spectacularly failing to meet even the most conservative estimates. If you're tired of Hollywood sugarcoating its biggest disasters, hit subscribe now. The next studio collapse is already brewing, and the warning signs are hiding in plain sight. No one expected Snow White to fail this catastrophically. This wasn't just another disappointing remake.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird.
She's not going to be safe with the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
Oh my God.
It was a $200 million investment in Disney's crown jewel, their very first animated feature film. The studio that built an empire on fairy tales somehow managed to alienate the very audience that had supported them for generations. When the numbers came in, a catastrophic $43 million.
So she came out and took a large dump on half of the country, everyone who voted for Trump.
But you are not entitled to call for Trump supporters to be harmed. Like, you are actually not entitled to do that. And so let me just remind you, Rachel Zegler, of what the map looks like, just so you can understand when your Disney movie is coming out, how many people you are wishing harm upon. Like, this is America right now. I will love you through these 4 years as best I can. F Donald Trump. Yeah, totally stable thing for her to be posting, wishing harm upon Trump voters, wishing that we have no peace.
President Rachel Zegler also posted, F Trump kinds of posts on social media. She also said that she hoped that Trump supporters, quote, never know peace.
Opening against expectations of $150 million, executives were left stunned, scrambling for explanations. The gleaming red apple at the center of this story concealed something far more poisonous than anyone anticipated. Disney had spent years carefully planning this reimagining, hiring fresh talent, securing an enormous budget, and scheduling a prime release slot.
And then she came out and she said, I apologize. Like, I went too far. But it wasn't sincere.
What they didn't account for was how dramatically their creative decisions would backfire. Did you know that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs wasn't just Disney's first animated feature? It was the film that saved the entire studio from bankruptcy in 1937. The irony that its remake could now contribute to one of Disney's worst financial periods wasn't lost on industry insiders. But to understand how a guaranteed hit transformed into a guaranteed disaster, we need to go back to the earliest development.
The movie is doing catastrophically. They spent $300 million, and it currently has a 2.2 out of 10 rating on IMDb.
The movie has a major identity crisis.
Meetings, where the first fatal decisions were made. We're not making your grandmother's fairy tale anymore. Those words, reportedly spoken in an early production meeting, set the tone for what would become Disney's most controversial remake. The creative team had decided that
Disney deleted Someday My Prince Will Come and made a modernized feminist alternative.
I sat through the whole thing. This was really bad. It was extremely leftist on every political dimension: racial politics, sexual politics, class politics, regime politics. Its narrative was cowardly. It was just awful.
They say all you have to do to make your wish come true is let it echo, 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 echo.
It's awful, generic. Never mind that the lyrics make no sense at all. All you have to do to make your dream come true is let it echo. Is it like on a metaphorical level?
Snow White's century-old story needed more than a visual update. It needed a complete philosophical overhaul. The original tale centered around themes of innocence, jealousy, and the triumph of true love. The remake, however, would deliberately distance itself from these elements. Most notably, the prince, a central figure in the original narrative, would be minimized or potentially removed entirely. When star Rachel Zegler proudly announced in interviews that
and be swept off of your feet and live happily ever after. No, you should want to be the prince. You should want to go out and fight the bad guys with a sword.
This isn't a love story, and that her Snow White isn't dreaming about a prince, longtime fans felt the first tremors of concern. But the changes went deeper. The seven dwarfs, iconic characters with distinct personalities that audiences had cherished for generations, were reportedly replaced with magical creatures of various heights and appearances. This decision came after comments from actor Peter Dinklage, criticizing the portrayal of dwarves in the original. But rather than updating the characters thoughtfully, Disney opted to essentially remove them completely. The cool blue shadows of the enchanted forest in the original gave way to something far less magical. Corporate anxiety over potential criticism had driven creative decisions rather than storytelling instinct. The studio was now walking a precarious tightrope between modernization and tradition. But the scattered creative vision was only the first domino to fall. Soon, the film's star would inadvertently push the next one. Her casting had initially seemed perfect. Rachel Zegler, fresh off successful roles in West Side Story and Shazam, brought youth, vocal talent, and star power to Snow White. On paper, she was everything Disney could want in a modern princess. Then the interviews began. In promotional appearances, Zegler repeatedly
Did the dwarfs make it or no?
Well, the CGI dwarfs did. Of course, that goes back to the original controversy where Peter Dinklage, a very talented little person actor, said, "Why are we doing that? We've hired a Latina actress to be Snow White. That's progressive. But you're going to hire little people to play the dwarfs? That just seems like a step backwards." And then, of course, Disney instantly buckled and said, "Okay, we're going to add magical creatures."
Then they got even crazier and they decided that the dwarves in Snow White weren't woke enough, okay?
Herself from the original Snow White story, describing the prince as a guy who literally stalks her and expressing discomfort with the original's focus on romance. The comments might have been an attempt to highlight the remake's modern sensibilities, but to many fans, they came across as dismissive of a beloved classic.
And then they couldn't put dwarfs finding a way to find their way back to doing something not progressive. You'd think the most progressive thing would be get people jobs, and dwarfs want to work. That many scripts that come down the pike.
No, only 7 of them.
That has, and there's seven dwarf jobs here. But because I think it was Peter Dinklage said this is, this is not right to...
Then came the social media revelations. Old posts surfaced showing Zegler making politically charged statements, including ones that some interpreted as antagonistic toward certain audience demographics. In one particularly controversial post, she had written that supporters of a specific political...
They've been in a full meltdown about this girl for a couple of years now, and how they had her tweet out like a little... "Yay, Snow White, can't wait, so excited, I love to play her." And she did it and got like millions of views, and they were like, "Good job, Rachel." And then she, like minutes later, followed it up with, "And never forget, free Palestine." And then they had to hire a special media consultant for her to follow her around all the time and make sure she didn't continue shitting on Snow White.
Figure should never know peace. Did you know that Snow White's target audience spans one of the broadest demographic ranges in entertainment? From children experiencing the story for the first time to grandparents who grew up with the original, Disney relies on cross-generational appeal, making politically divisive statements particularly risky for its stars. The sweet scent of fresh apple pie that once surrounded the Snow White brand had soured into something bitter. But the brewing storm was about to attract attention from some unexpected cultural commentators. The crackling sound of Joe Rogan's podcast intro doesn't typically signal agreement with Bill Maher's political talk show. These two influential voices rarely align on cultural issues. Rogan, with his freewheeling conversational style, appealing to a center-right audience, and Maher, with his progressive yet contrarian takes, aimed at a more liberal demographic. Yet Snow White's troubled development somehow managed to unite them in criticism. On his podcast reaching millions of listeners, Rogan didn't hold back, calling the remake evidence that studios fear backlash more than they want to entertain, and lamenting that they're petrified of some kind of backlash to the point of sacrificing good storytelling. The harsh assessment resonated with his massive audience. Meanwhile, on his weekly show, Maher zeroed in on what he saw as the irony of the situation. These big bad feminists now are telling us that's ridiculous. How dare you want to meet a handsome prince and be swept off your feet? No, you should want to be the prince, he remarked, highlighting how the attempt at progressive messaging had circled back to unintentionally restrictive thinking. Their criticisms, coming from different parts of the political spectrum but arriving at similar conclusions, gave mainstream validity to what had previously been dismissed as fringe complaints from purists. The palpable tension around the film had escalated from fan discontent to cultural conversation. But nothing would compare to the humbling visual evidence that came next, a moment so raw it transcended discussion and became symbolic of the entire fiasco. The video that broke the internet was only 15 seconds long. On March 25, 2025, a clip surfaced showing Rachel Zegler and a small group of friends sitting in what appeared to be an almost entirely empty theater. As her name appeared on screen, one friend enthusiastically called out "Zegler" in a cheer that echoed through the vacant rows of seats. The actress's laughter in response carried an unmistakable note of discomfort. Whether the theater was naturally that empty or had been privately reserved remained unclear, but the visual impact was devastating. A Disney princess watching her own fairy tale in isolation, the once guaranteed audience nowhere to be found. The hollow echo of that single cheer against empty seats created a sound that executives couldn't ignore, the physical manifestation of rejection. Industry insiders reported that the video sent shockwaves through Disney's corporate offices, with one anonymous source claiming it was the final nail in the coffin for their current remake strategy. For Zegler herself, the moment represented a cruel twist in her rising career. From breakout star to the face of a high-profile failure in less than 2 years, the psychological weight of such public disappointment would challenge even the most seasoned performers. Did you know that successful Disney princess actresses typically enjoy a princess premium of 20 to 30% higher salary offers for their next 3 roles? This failure potentially cost Zegler millions in future earnings beyond just the immediate reputational damage. But the tremors from Snow White's collapse weren't contained to one actress or even one film. They threatened to reshape Disney's entire business model. Behind closed doors, panic had set in. Snow White wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the third consecutive major disappointment, following Lightyear and Strange World. For a studio that had built its recent strategy around mining its own classics for guaranteed returns, this pattern represented an existential threat. Financial analysts estimated the Snow White remake would need to gross at least $450 million worldwide just to break even. With its catastrophic opening and rapid audience decline, the film was on track to lose well over $100 million. Shareholders, already nervous about Disney's direction, began demanding answers. The sharp, metallic scent of fear permeated executive offices as emergency meetings were called. Rumors of significant layoffs swirled, with the remake division reportedly facing the deepest cuts. Development on several other announced remakes was quietly paused as the studio reassessed its approach. The most painful realization for Disney wasn't just that Snow White had failed, but why it had failed. The evidence increasingly pointed to a fundamental disconnect between the studio's current creative philosophy and what their audience actually wanted. Attempting to modernize beloved stories had ironically made them feel less relevant, not more. The question facing Disney now extends beyond Snow White to the very core of their identity. Can they rediscover what made their stories magical in the first place? Or will they continue down a path that distances them further from their audience with each release? For a company whose motto once promised, "Where dreams come true," the nightmare of Snow White's failure might be the wake-up call they desperately needed. When the credits rolled on Snow White's opening weekend, they told a story far different from the fairy tale Disney had hoped for. A perfect storm of creative miscalculations, controversial casting, and cultural backlash had transformed what should have been a guaranteed success into a cautionary tale for the entire industry. The film that once saved Disney from financial ruin in 1937 has now become a symbol of their current creative crisis. As executives retreat to rethink their strategy and Rachel Zegler moves forward with the weight of this failure, the message from audiences remains crystal clear. Respect the magic that made these stories beloved in the first place. If you found this breakdown illuminating, tap subscribe before our next deep dive into Hollywood's biggest miscalculations. The industry's next collapse is already in motion, and the warning signs are hiding in plain sight.